Well, thank you very much, and it couldn't be more exciting to have Darren receive the prize. It's very well deserved. He could have gotten it for many other topics, many other contributions besides the one that they explicitly mentioned. So it is a very well-deserved prize. The subject that I'm talking about, the U.S. presidential election, is, as it was just mentioned, probably the most important issue in determining what happens over the coming years on the green agenda. So I can't tell you who's going to win. I can tell you who I hope will win. And I think I'm actually optimistic. I think there are some grounds for optimism, but I'm not going to go into that. What I am going to talk about are the major differences in policy, and by way of discussing that, bring up several issues, not only about U.S. policy, but also about European policy, green policies as well. The fact that it's a toss-up says a great deal about polarization in the United States and the role of identity politics. And the reason why I mention that is that even when Trump gets defeated, the polarization will be there. So the fight will be on, and Trump has had global impact, not only in giving voice to authoritarian figures, but also giving voice to those who are climate skeptics, who, like Trump, claim it's a hoax, people like Bolsonaro in Brazil. So this is not only, this has become a global issue, and unfortunately, U.S. leadership in this way has had very serious consequences. There are a broader set of issues that I'm sure most of you may have been thinking about. Issues like, can the U.S. be relied on for Europe's defense, for support for human rights and democracy, to uphold the international rule of law, to advance multilateralism? And my answer, even as an American, is you can't rely on America. And that has strong implications. You know, I've never been a big supporter of defense expenditures, but after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and seeing the way that the Republicans have prevaricated on that issue, I really do think it's important for Europe to step up and increase its military expenditure. But the particular issue on the table, of course, is climate change. And climate is a global issue and needs global cooperation. And with Trump being both a climate skeptic and against global cooperation, and doing everything he can to fragment the world, the consequences of a Trump election couldn't be greater. So let me try to distinguish some of the differences and how they might play out. One side, it should be obvious who that is, sees climate as an existential threat. It recognizes the urgency and wants to do everything possible, but here's a caveat: within certain perceived political constraints. For instance, the Biden administration has refused to settle what is called the children's suit, a suit by 21 children against the Biden administration, saying that the failure to address climate has denied them of due process, it violates common law, There have been several suits in Europe that some of them have been successful. I happen to be an expert witness in this particular suit. It's gone up to the Supreme Court twice and been passed down. It's been going on for now through Obama, Trump, and now Biden's administration. Biden should have settled it, but he hasn't. Another great concern, and here Europe is imitating the United States or following it, are the tariffs against Chinese solar panels and EV. And the fact of the matter is that those tariffs are raising the cost of responding to climate change and therefore slowing the progress in fighting it. I do think it's important to develop long-run capacities, but as I'll comment, maybe if I have time, it can be done in ways that don't slow the responses to climate change today. So that's my brief view of the Biden and Harris will continue, I think, in that same strain. Very strong on climate, but not as strong as I would like. But on the other side, Trump has called climate change a hoax. He minimizes the role of humans in climate change, if it exists. He's in bed with the fossil fuel industry, and he would roll back the IRA and climate regulations. So, even as I criticize the Biden administration, the gap between the two couldn't be greater. As I said, climate change is a global issue. It needs a global solution, and that necessitates cooperation with multilateral institutions playing a critical role. And since World War II, U.S. has played a pivotal role in advancing multilateralism. That would continue under Harris, I believe. But Trump has consistently undermined global cooperation and multilateralism, and even more so when it comes to cooperation on climate, evidenced by, for instance, his exiting the Paris Agreement, and he said he would exit it once again if he gets reelected. But here again, let me criticize a little bit what Europe has done, and hopefully you will put pressure on your political leaders. Europe has not taken a strong stance on these issues as it should. They allow Trump's appointment to the World Bank, David Malpass, who was, remarkably appointed president of the World Bank and says he said he didn't believe in multilateralism. I mean, how could you do that? And Europe voted for him. You could understand why Trump would nominate somebody who doesn't believe in multilateralism, because he doesn't believe in it. But why Europe would vote for that beggars belief. And I hope it doesn't happen again. It was a costly, very costly failure during the previous Trump administration. Another point that I've already raised very briefly is that both Europe and the U.S. have put jobs over the green transition in the discussions of solar panels and EVs. They've claimed that they are unfairly subsidized. If that claim has any validity, we have an international framework for addressing that, which is the WTO. There are, if you go to the WTO and there have been subsidies, you can impose countervailing duties. That's the rule of law. We just got a new Nobel Prize on the importance of institutions and the rule of law, and how important that is for our society. And yet, Europe and the United States have trampled on this aspect of the rule of law. Actually, when the evidence, some of it's been published, is pretty strong that the subsidies, if they exist, are minor and are the kind that you see all over Western countries, United States and Europe. And so this charge of large subsidies is probably unfair, at least today. It may have been in the past, but at least today. The reason China has some big advantages over the United States. It has a larger market, high levels of competition. It has availability of capital. They have a savings rate of 25, 30. In some years, it's been 40% or more. And they have high levels of skill, many more engineers. Most of our students in our engineering school are from China. So they have all these advantages, and they have the further advantage. They saw climate change coming and did something about it. They began industrial policies pushing climate change, telling people they had to focus on green, EVs and electric batteries. I was with the premier of China when he had a meeting with an American auto executive, and one of the big companies, and he said to him, if you don't make the transition to total green, to total electric vehicles within 5 years, you're going to be out of here. So they had the vision to see that you need green cars. Now, there was an obvious reason for that. They were dying from pollution. So it wasn't all worried about global issues. It was partly a demand from their citizens who were, anybody who visited Beijing 10 years ago knows what I'm talking about. Well, these restrictions are, as I said before, increasing the cost of the green transition and slowing the pace. But even taking all these criticisms into account, the fact of the matter is Trump will be worse. So he would be far more aggressive than Harris. He doesn't care about the green transition. He's focused on jobs, and he doesn't understand economics or the role of macroeconomics versus trade policy. It is not the responsibility of trade policy to create jobs. That's the responsibility of macroeconomic policy. I want to have a brief digression, if I have a few minutes to do that, on a somewhat technical topic, but one that is very important, discussed widely in the United States, not gotten quite so much attention in Europe, and that's what's called the social cost of carbon. That's the number that is used by governments and should be used by the private sector in deciding whether it's worthwhile to make a green investment. And we call it the social cost of carbon because carbon puts a cost in all of our society that we will have to deal with, the extremes of weather, the disasters that are coming. And so we ought to incorporate that into everything that we do. And economists have worked hard to try to get a number on all of that, to summarize all of that into what is the cost of carbon and how much effort we should put in a dollar sense to avoid emissions. And under Obama, it was $43 a ton. Then under Trump, it was lowered. Different parts of the government used different numbers, but it was somewhere between $7 and $35, much, much lower. One of the first things that Biden did when he took office was to issue an executive order saying we need to revisit this theme. And he came up with a substantially higher number, $51, but a number that is less than half of what it should be. So that's, again, a critique of Biden, and hopefully Harris will raise it. But the fact that I'm criticizing Biden doesn't take away from the fact that it's so much better than what Trump did. And let me tell you why that's so important, because if you use a very low cost of carbon, it's associated with almost doing nothing about climate change.
Yeah.
And the reason that those who think we shouldn't do, the reason that the number is so low is because they underestimate the damage, which, the evidence keeps coming on, the damage is larger. I was on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that evaluates all this back in 1995, and the one mistake we made is we underestimated, even then, the magnitude and the pace of climate change. But even then it was clear we ought to do more. And the models that were used by Obama's team underestimated the damage. But another problem is that they undervalue future generations. If you don't care about the future, then go ahead and pollute. But any of us who care about the future, and there's strong philosophical arguments, you mentioned Amartya Sen, and Ken Arrow, who make very strong arguments why ethically it's indefensible not to care about the future. Well, the point of what I'm making is that using this low social cost of carbon implies no action, no concern about future generations. Hopefully, the Harris administration will move towards a significantly higher social cost of carbon. Trump would be a big step backwards. He would again lower the social cost of carbon, and he's promised to repeal the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a peculiar name. They had to call it that to get it through the U.S. Congress, and that shows the polarization in the country. But it contained very strong green policies. And it was very poorly designed, I have to admit that. But, and that means it gave very little bang for the buck in terms of the green transition. But it was an awful lot of bucks. Originally, it was intended to be in the office of the OMB, both the OMB and the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimated that the cost would be about $350 billion of subsidies. The current estimates are that it will be between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion. It was tax credits that were unlimited. And people have taken advantage of them, which is a good thing, because it means that the legislation actually worked and is accelerating the green transition, but it also means that it's become a big target for Trump, and he has said he will repeal it. Well, one of the reasons that I've emphasized global cooperation is, as I say, climate change is a global issue. And the biggest polluter in the world now is not the United States, but China. Not per capita, but in total. And that means addressing the problem of climate change has to get Chinese cooperation. And that's why in thinking about climate policy, one has to see that in the context of the bigger geopolitical scene that is going on. I think Trump would strongly undermine that cooperation. I mean, he's announced tariffs of 100% or more against China. It's very clear it would be very, very aggressive. My worry is that Harris might find it difficult getting that cooperation unless there's a little bit of a pivot. The current administration has taken the stance that we can be aggressive with China in multiple arenas, but cooperate in others. So we can be aggressive in other aspects of trade policy, but when it comes to climate, we all work together. Many, including many of the people I know in China, are skeptical. And the more recent actions of China suggest that that skepticism may be well-deserved. I don't know if you've been following it, but in response to U.S. restrictions on the export of chips, China has imposed restrictions on the exports of gallium and germanium, which are essential metals that are used for the production of lots of things, including your iPhone, and some of the green technologies also require these. And those are seen as a response to U.S. restrictions on exports of chips. And that would have, if that continues, very severe consequences. Still, no matter how much I might criticize Harris, Harris will impose lower tariffs, will act less aggressively, and I think there are much better chances of cooperations. Now, I've given a pretty dismal picture. Disaster if Trump gets elected, and some problems.
The latest Economist calls it the Trumpification of America, regardless of who wins.
Yeah, but there is a very big difference. There is a very big difference. But now I want to give you some reasons for optimism, or not. Things may not be as dismal as I've just suggested. And there are 3 or 4 of those. First of all, the states like California and New York are setting standards that affect the entire nation. You know, California is 20% of the U.S., would be the 5th largest country in the world, and they are totally committed to the green transition. They've proposed saying you can't sell internal combustion engines after 2035, I think. And they have a strong policy supported by their citizens. I mean, this is strong support. Trump tried during his previous administration to take away California's discretion in setting its own regulations, but he failed. Now, he will try again, and California is working hard to immunize itself against this. There's a very good article on this in the New York Times, I think just yesterday, on California's attempt to protect itself to Trump-proof.
So we have Trumpification on the one hand and Trump vaccine on the other hand.
Yes. And I should have mentioned that the IRA was designed in part in the way it was to Trump-proof it. That is to say, it was deliberate that the benefits would go to a lot of red states that would make it more difficult for them to repeal it. Secondly, global companies realize that they have to comply with global standards. And, you've talked to a lot of global companies operating in the United States, American companies. They can't have two standards. And they know that if they behave badly in the US, they will be castigated in Europe. Thirdly, a large fraction of citizens, and especially young people, are concerned about climate change and are adapting their behavior. When we have a dinner for our students, we have to be vegetarian and give a vegan option because there's been really a shift in diet.
We at the conference take note.
And the large political climate impacts are inducing even political leaders in the red states to respond. And so I think there are reasons for hope over the longer run.
I certainly hope so.
Let me turn now to one particular. I mentioned the IRA and how it is really pushing the green transition in the United States with global impacts. But there's some other global consequences of the IRA that are not quite so positive. The IRA violated the basic principles of the rule-based order and the rules of the WTO. It was described as a deliberate attempt by itself as a deliberate attempt to grab green jobs. The magnitude is so large that it can't be matched even by Europe. Europe's senior officials in Europe have complained to me and say they just can't match the $1.5 trillion. It's partly because of your political structure. You have the money, or you could get the money, but your institutional arrangements make it very difficult. And in many parts of the world, particularly in developing countries and emerging markets, they're asking the question of whether there ever was a rules-based international order. The rules were largely written by the United States, and then when the rules proved inconvenient for the United States, the US ignored them. Yeah. And so if you have a rule that's only obeyed when it's convenient for you, is it a rules-based order? At the same time, US and Europe insisted that developing countries and emerging markets obey the rules, even when it resulted in unnecessary hospitalizations and deaths during the pandemic, as the West put drug company profits over their lives. What I'm talking about is the developing countries, led by South Africa and India, asked for a intellectual property waiver so that they could produce the vaccines and other pandemic-related products. And the WTO, especially because of Germany, Switzerland, and UK, said no. And this has left a scar because thousands of people died as a result. And this helps explain the lack of support for the West in Ukraine, and it will make global cooperation in other arenas more difficult. U.S. has actually said explicitly, Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, has said that it won't obey WTO rules and won't allow appointment of appellate judges under their reforms until it undertakes reforms that are to its liking. Yeah. So basically, the WTO is no longer effective when it comes to the United States, but is effective when it's in the interest of the United States. So I think restoring a rules-based order and a more level playing field and advancing is absolutely essential for advancing a green agenda. The law of the jungle will be bad for the world, and especially for developing countries and emerging markets. and will be bad for the green agenda. And that leads me to the final set of points. Given the abuses of the past, the old-style big trade agreements are unlikely. The development round was a failure. So this is where I think we might be able to go with a Harris administration, not with the Trump one, which are limited green agreements focusing on green trade and on greening trade, and entailing helping developing countries and emerging markets with finance and technology to rebalance the level playing field that's been so distorted by the IRA. Let me finally make one point that cooperation is better than Europe's current approach. I don't know if how many have followed some of the things that Europe has been doing, but they've issued what's called the Deforestation Directive that's saying you can't import agricultural goods on newly deforested lands, and they've proposing to impose taxes on goods that are made in a dirty way. Both of those, at one level, seem perfectly good ideas, but the way that they've been adopted unilaterally and the way that they're being implemented are viewed as unfair to developing countries. There's costly compliance. Even the US has said it can't comply with the Deforestation Directive. And so have some of the, a couple of the European countries have as well. And what's unfortunate about the way it's been done, it's likely to have no effect on climate change. It will just change patterns of trade with non-compliant agricultural goods sold to other countries. And of course, it's being challenged in the WTO. Well, the point about this is that under Trump, there's likely to be a strong reaction from the United States with large counter tariffs. And so these measures are likely to generate a green trade war. Just the opposite of what one wants, which is global cooperation. So finally, let me conclude with just a few summary and review points. Climate change is a global issue that can only be addressed globally. That will entail global cooperation. Trump will undermine such cooperation, but Harris will have trouble restoring American leadership and helping establish more effective multilateralism. Europe needs to be careful not to follow the United States, like in trying to have industrial policies that unlevel the playing field.
But we're going to, unfortunately.
What?
But sadly, I think that is the route we're taking.
Yeah. Well, that's right. You should try to curb it.
Well, the economists will try. We want BYD vehicles to come into Europe and so on, but you know, tariffs will go up. Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
We're getting into the discussion, so let me just finish the last point. Advancing the green agenda will require industrial policies. I agree with that. But the advanced countries need to provide finance and transfer technology, and that's a better strategy for engendering global cooperation, and global cooperation is absolutely necessary if we're going to advance the green agenda globally. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed.